Okay, so last video had a request for pull downs, and we're gonna do pull ups here, both overhand and underhand, so chin up if people are familiar with that terminology. And then we'll move to a pull down machine. If a cable's open, we'll do a cable as well. And also had a request for dips. So we'll do tricep and chest dips to show you guys how to do those and how to set up for those. So this is gonna be the most common piece of equipment that people have access to when it comes to an assisted machine for pull-ups, chin-ups, whatever you wanna call it. Different grip variations of the same movement. So I will almost always recommend that unless you are very light and starting from if you're starting at a set point of being very light and you can do an unassisted pull-up with ease, that's fine. But I prefer assisted pull-ups because they allow you to take a lot of that stress off of the arm, a lot of the tension out of the arm, and put more of it into the back. Even if it's just a little bit of assistance, it can help with that kind of a setup. So that's what I prefer. If you don't have access to this, which would be kind of surprising to me, but if you don't, you can do them if you're relatively light, just a standard pull-up. If you're heavier, whether that's muscle or otherwise, then you might have issues with a normal pull-up, so a pull down would generally be better. Regardless though, getting into the setup for this is pretty simple. When you're choosing a grip, you're ultimately just going to be choosing what you want to target. And I'll show you here a bit. Let's say we take an overhand grip like this. You're gonna notice that when I come up, I'm coming up and retracting a lot through the shoulder blades and almost pinching the mid-back, okay? When I take an underhand grip, say close in here, there's a little less pinch on the mid-back and a little bit more emphasis on that low lat, okay? So it does change how you're hitting the musculature of the back. That's why you need to select the grip to target what you want to work or what you need to develop most. It's also a matter of preference. And for me, I prefer an underhand grip, regardless of how I'm doing this movement, just because it feels better to me. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking that changing the grip, the only thing it's changing is the amount of bicep involved in the movement. Ideally, we don't want to have any bicep involved in the movement, or very little. Obviously, you're going to always have some ancillary muscles that are being worked when you're trying to target, in this case, your back. But that isn't what we want to primarily work here. We want to eliminate as much of the grip and as much of the forearm and bicep as possible and focus on the back. So find a weight that allows you to hit whatever your target reps are, whether that's 8 to 12, 10 to 15, those are usually the most common ranges for something like this, without really stressing your forearm and taking the tension away from your back. You want to be able to comfortably glide through and pull through the back without overemphasizing the arm in any way, whether that's up here in the bicep or down here in the forearm or even at the wrist. So one cue I use to kind of help set up a grip for that is if we imagine this is the handle up here and we're grabbing an overhand grip, then don't wrap your hand like you're death gripping it. The goal isn't to death grip whatever you're using to pull down, pull up, any machine, okay? Especially with back movements. The goal is to just grab comfortably so that the grip, and this is a little big, rests pretty much on the last digit of the finger, but comfortably kind of in the nook of the hand here under the knuckle, and then use that to support yourself. You see here, I can put, well, this is gonna rotate on me, I can put my full weight on that and pull myself forward without any strain, just utilizing my back. There's no arm involvement there. There's no over involvement of the grip. But if I overly death grip this, it actually makes it harder for me to just isolate my back. And I want to pull through the wrist, the arm, all of the elbow, all the musculature that is ahead of my back, in front of my back. So if we let that relax a little bit, you just approach it a little bit more relaxed than you normally would, that will help isolate the back more. And before we get further into the movement, I also want to say that when we're talking about working the back, you have to remember we're not working just one muscle. The back isn't a muscle. There's rhomboids, traps, lats, the erectors. The back is comprised of many, many muscles. So you have to be very specific in what you're targeting, or just make sure you're doing enough movements that you're targeting things holistically and you're getting enough work for your back as a whole. Obviously, if you're at a higher level, you're going to know where your weak points are or have someone who's assessing those weak points for you, and you're going to be able to fine-tune your training around those weak points So you work in movements that are more specific to what you actually need to bring up. But for someone who's just starting, just be general and try to understand that you're not working the back as one muscle. You're working as a whole of many muscles, and you need to be doing a variety of back work. So we're going to cover a ton of back work over the coming weeks because it's the area where most people have the most difficulty connecting, executing movements, understanding how to set up for movements in general. So because it's the biggest shortcoming for most people, we're going to spend the most time on it. But today, like I said, we'll start with these pull-ups here. So the biggest thing to set up for here first is the lower part of the body. Everything starts from the lower part of the body. If you're standing, you're going to want to plant your feet. If you're on a movement that has, let's say it's a row and you plant your feet on that, you're going to want to set yourself up so that your weight is anchored to your feet and you are using that as the basis for your entire movement. Here, we're not using our feet. Some machines do have a foot supported assisted pad. It's more of a bar. So if you have that, then yeah, you are. But for most people, it's going to be your knee. So we want to really anchor that knee into the pad. You don't want to be floating off of this where you're yanking yourself up, coming up off the pad, and it's throwing itself up and hitting the machine. It's not doing anything for you there. You want to find a weight that allows you to move with the resistance of the machine comfortably while still being able to execute a high intensity movement, okay? So start by placing the knees on the pad. We'll do this underhand. And then let yourself hang down. Now get tall through the chest like you would with any other movement. From this point, the biggest mistake that I see people make is doing this. They want to come forward with their head and let that chest collapse. The low back comes out and they're doing this, okay? It's really, really emphasizing the arms in that type of a movement and that type of a setup and position. So what we want to do is keep that back, that low spine, almost straight, maybe even a little bit lordosis in the low back, and then keep the sternum, the chest high by, again, as we did with chest movements, cueing by tucking the chin back. So I'll get off this here. And to demonstrate what I mean when I say tucking the chin back, again, I went over this last week, but we'll touch on it in pretty much every video. The biggest cue you can do or use for keeping that chest and sternum high is to just tuck your chin. If you're standing here relaxed and you tuck your chin, like you're trying to give yourself a double chin, or in my case, a triple chin, then your chest is going to rise and your back is going to fall into the position you want it to be in to properly support yourself through these movements. And not only properly support yourself, but properly target what we're actually trying to work. That's the biggest thing. So applying that to the movement here and actually getting into this. Remember, we're going to lock the grip in so that we are just in the knuckle a little bit here, not overly death gripping it, and let ourselves hang. You should be able to hang here comfortably. Obviously, you know, you're going to fatigue after a while, but you should be able to do this with relative ease, okay? This isn't painful or uncomfortable or impossible for me to do in this position. From here, chin back, chest up, pull through. Lower, pull through. Pull through. The most challenging part of that movement for most people is just going to be finding a grip that works for you. Don't be married to this idea of, I have to do overhand because it's involving less of the bicep, or it's working the back in some magical way. Some people are so dogmatic about the way they approach these things, it's really unnecessary. Find something that works for you. If you're a person who likes the neutral grip, do it. Because if you connect best with it, if you feel that movement best and it feels best for you, you're probably going to get the most benefit out of that type of a grip. For me, I hate the overhand I just did. I really do. There are specific use cases where I use overhand on machines, but almost never on something like this. I'm almost always doing an underhand pull, or a chin up, as most people would call it. So find something that works for you, find what's comfortable, and then set up properly. And again, setting up properly on this, as with most back movements, chin tucked, chest up, and that's really it. Now, if you want to get another layer of complexity to this here, You can keep the cue in mind to keep your shoulders down. So almost like we're depressing the shoulders and then locking that shoulder back and into the lat. So you're trying to almost lock your shoulder into the top of your lat, okay? And in doing that, you are going to only allow yourself, and we'll show you here. You're only going to allow yourself to come as far down as you can before your shoulder comes out of that locked position. So for me, that's about here. Any further and you'll see my shoulder rolls out. But if I stay locked, it's about here. And by doing that, we are keeping all of the tension and all of the focus on that lat and that musculature of the back. When we start getting to the point where we're hanging too much and you're putting all of that tension in the shoulder, one, it's not necessarily good for the shoulder, and two, you're taking all that tension off the back, which is where we actually want to focus it with this kind of a movement, okay? So I've kind of beaten this one to death. We'll move on to another one here, and then we will move on to the dips. So for this, we're gonna do a cable pull down. Cable pull down here, pretty much everybody should have access to this. I'm gonna do this over the pull down machine just because the machines you typically are setting up for in the same way as you're doing a pull up. The cable's a little bit unique in the sense that there's no chest support and there's no way to really lock yourself in like there are in some other movements. So, well, there is, but it's a little bit different. So, for example here, what I see most people do, they get in, they grab as far as they can out on this bar. I have no weight on this, so I almost just flew down. And then they're doing one of these and flinging themselves all over the place, flailing with their arms all the way out here in fucking Africa for no reason. They're completely worthless. Like, what is this doing for you? Okay, you're pinching your scapula, so you're getting a little bit of engagement there. But if you're trying to do a lat pull down, this is the worst thing you can do, okay? So there's a couple ways we could address that, and that's with different attachments. But first, let's stay on this bar. Let's bring the grip in, okay? Grab it about a shoulder width, maybe a little bit inside, and then bring this down. Now the knee pad on this is already set up perfectly for me. You can see here, I am tight into this, okay? So I am, every time I'm pulling, pushing up through the knee pad pretty much as hard as I can, okay? We're doing that to keep ourselves locked into the machine so that we're not limp in the low body. Again, the low body is your base for everything you're going to be doing. It's the base for all of your movement. So from here, on the upper body, it's the same sort of setup we had on the pull-up machine, okay? You're gonna keep that back locked, chin back, and chest high, and then pull down, okay? Now, when you're pulling, I see a lot of people do this. And there's reasons you would do that. This is more of an upper back pull down. You could, work the upper back by pulling with the elbows more outward, flared, and coming across the upper back like so. But if you're really trying to work lats, your goal should be, and this is the best cue I use for this, to put your elbow in your pocket, okay? So we're coming down, and you wanna come down, I like neutral grips on this for this reason. You wanna come down like this. You want that elbow to almost be in front of you and be as close to the body as possible while being tucked in to that pocket and tucked into the lat. So to do this on a bar like this, if this is really all you had access to, you just wanna bring your grip in a little further and probably lean yourself back a little bit more than you normally would to lock into that back and then pull down. And then here, the same principle as what we were talking about before, when it comes to staying locked and then rocking forward, okay? You don't want to over-exaggerate this. You can just rock forward a bit and then come back down. And same thing as well, when we're talking about keeping yourself locked into your lat, I can do it here because this is very light. Lock into the lat with the shoulder, keep the shoulder depressed, come up until you start to feel that tension rise off of the lat, and then come back down, okay? That's gonna vary for everybody. Just because not everybody can go all the way up here while staying tucked into the lat. In fact, very few people can, especially if you're bigger. So keep locked into the lat, come down. That's all there is to it. It's really simple. For most people though, get rid of this bar. Don't fucking use this thing. Use a neutral grip, use two cloth handles if you need to. Use anything that's going to allow you to keep the elbow closer to the body and in a line that allows you to basically line it with your hips and put it into the pocket. That's pretty much it for this movement, okay? Now we're gonna move on to dips. Okay, so this is, I pray none of you have this equipment because it's absolute dog shit. This is like, there's some really good Nautilus stuff. This is the worst of it. This is actually terrible. But that's why I'm showing this one, is because if you have access to this or you have access to only the worst of the worst, you obviously want to be able to make do with what you have and make it work. So for this, you could set up to do a chest dip on this. You could also set up to do a tricep dip, which is what this is for. This is technically called a tricep press by Nautilus. It's a tricep assisted dip machine. If you're gonna do a chest press, I would recommend doing it on the pull down, like what we did just a minute ago. In fact, we might even go back there to show you guys that again. But for now, tricep press, tricep push down, whatever you wanna call it, assisted tricep dip. So this machine, if you're one of the people who can fit into it, I'm not, lock your legs in. Again, we wanna keep ourselves locked as much as possible. But the bigger thing with triceps dip, I'm gonna confuse myself now because of the name of the machine, is that you wanna keep the arms in a pretty much straight alignment. So you wanna stack wrist, elbow, and shoulder rather than flaring out. When you start flaring out, you're gonna get a lot more chest and shoulder involvement. And then obviously if you start leaning forward, you're gonna get more chest involvement as well. That would be kind of catering towards a chest dip. However, what we wanna do here for the triceps is keep ourselves relatively straight, keep the arms straight back, let them fold. Remember, you're not trying to do this. You're not rising through the shoulders and the traps. You're keeping your shoulders down. You're letting the tricep stretch and then pressing through the tricep, okay? Straight down. Now, if we wanted to turn this into a chest movement, we could. It's not the easiest on this machine, but instead of just keeping that elbow tight to the body, we would let it flare out a little bit more, and we would get more of a lean over so that the chest is a little bit more engaged because we're leaning forward, and you're gonna press down like this. That's really it. These are relatively simple. When it comes to how you are setting up your dip and what you're trying to target, it's going to mostly come to torso positioning and then the arm path, specifically the elbow and how you're keeping the elbow aligned or not necessarily aligned with the body in the case of the chest dip. So for the tricep, again, you want to keep the wrist, elbow, and shoulder as close to inline as possible. Obviously, bigger guys might have a little bit of an issue with that, but as close as possible. And then keep that torso more vertical. For the chest dip, let the elbows flare a little bit more, not exaggerated. You don't want it to be, you know, completely far out because then you're gonna get a lot of front delt engagement, but you want them to come out a little bit, and then you want to lean forward enough that you're engaging the chest, that low pec specifically, when you're actually pressing down through the movement, as though you're pressing downward, almost like you're doing a hyper decline press at an angle that is incredibly highly declined, okay? Or low decline, whatever you want to call it.